Big news out of Culiacan, really tragic story actually, but something that we've certainly seen before. 20 bodies were found on Monday, publicly displayed. It was definitely sending a message. We're gonna get into exactly what happened and what the message is that's being sent here. Thanks so much for tuning in. I'm Katarina Schultz, and this is Borderland Dispatches, an Ironclad original. All right, so 20 bodies were found in Culiacan, Sinaloa on Monday, 4 of them decapitated, hanging from a bridge. We have seen this time and time again over the past decades during the war on drugs, the cartel wars across all of Mexico. But we've seen this uptick since the capture and subsequent arrest of El Mayo last summer. This uptick in, obviously, infighting. We've talked about this time and time again, but extremely brutal daylight violence across a lot of Sinaloa. This is kind of the topic that got me into this reporting because it runs very deep. So the Sinaloa State Prosecutor's Office reported this grisly scene on Monday. 4 headless bodies, 16 bodies were discovered inside an abandoned vehicle near Culiacan, and 5 human heads inside a bag. There was also a narcomanta on the vehicle, so a message to the rival cartel, and a narcomanta, I think, on the bridge. It's a little hard to read the full manta, but it is targeted to Iván Archibaldo, the son of El Chapo Guzman. So this certainly was a message from likely El Mayo's faction of the cartel to Los Chapitos. Now, Feliciano Castro is the government spokesperson for Sinaloa, and he obviously condemned the killings and said authorities need to examine their strategy for tackling organized crime due to the magnitude of violence seen. I mean, yeah, tell me something we don't know. People's lives are horribly affected by this ongoing violence. We've been knowing that there is a need for systemic change, a change in how authorities deal with it in terms of how cartels are perceived, the level of justice that's received for these kinds of crimes. When we hear about these cases, we rarely actually see a perpetrator end up in jail or being charged for this very crime. You know, we hear about the headless bodies hanging from bridges in headlines, but we never see a headline that says so-and-so is responsible and now has subsequently been charged for their involvement or their role in these bodies hanging from the bridge, okay? Now, this violence obviously peaked after the arrest of El Mayo Zambada in July. We know what happened, right? I mean, there were rumors, theories at first where people were saying, well, he was set up by the Chapitos, he was set up by the US government. This was a ploy. It was essentially kingpin strategy in its truest form, okay? Dismantle the leaders. So first we went for El Chapo Guzman, who was extradited to the US in 2017 and sentenced to life in prison in 2019. That left a void in the Sinaloa cartel. His sons really leveled up and took over. And then last year, you have Zambada end up in the United States in a private jet, like a little, actually, like more light aircraft. But this was certainly a measure that the United States took, likely. Okay, this is all alleged, right? But if we really look at this in the big picture of things and how we're probably going to read about it in history books on cartel violences, this was a measure to fragment and disrupt the Sinaloa cartel, cracking down on its kingpins, El Mayo and El Chapo, causing this infighting between the very cartel, causing it to fraction and eventually sort of fall. And then also, El Chapo's sons get this incredible plea deal in the US. 17 family members receive visas, cross into the US, have protection. The absence and sort of silence of these two kingpins intensifies this power struggle. Where I have a problem with this is the fact that in spite of all of this happening and authorities maintaining this kingpin strategy, you see the CG&G, one of the most powerful and expansionist cartels, make an alliance with the Chapitos faction of the Sinaloa cartel. This is exactly what I mean when I say the kingpin strategy is a failure, because it breeds a hydra. You chop off the head and two bigger, badder ones grow back. Because it would be absolutely ridiculous to believe that this alliance won't lead to CG&G having control of Sinaloa once the Sinaloa cartel has completely dissolved itself. These cartel killings, particularly what we're seeing in Sinaloa, are extremely theatrical. Like it's theatrical level brutality. Sorry, I think today's my first time on earth speaking English and speaking. Now, this level of violence signals dominance, especially with the way that these individuals send their messages, whether it's by using the sombreros, the white hats, the pizza boxes, chopping off the heads, pulling down the pants, scattering the extremities in different areas as opposed to the body. When these victims are displayed or like arranged in these stylized ways, it's a form of propaganda. And I've spoken about this before. And I've spoken about how I feel that there's this lack of crackdown on cartel propaganda, because it is, in my opinion, is highly valuable for those of you that will question it. In my opinion, these are ways for them to invoke absolute fear in the public, assert dominance against federal and global authorities, and also, I say this time and time again, it's a game of catch me if you can. And who can flex bigger muscles than the very organizations responsible for the transnational global drug trade, the death toll that is in the hundreds of thousands just in Mexico, okay, due to cartel violence. And yet they're putting on these public displays of violence, and rarely is anyone getting charged for it. And then you have the family members, basically the entire freaking family of a major drug cartel receiving immunity in the United States. Who is winning this war? You tell me. Just so you guys know, the death toll in Mexico has, since 2006, is more than 500,000 people. And there's nearly 200,000 that we know of, people who have gone missing in Mexico. Okay, and this is why this topic makes me so passionate, because we're not just talking about some movie-style narcos and this glamorized idea of how these groups operate. It's about the people in between. You know, they're not on one side or the other. They're not with the authorities. They're not with the cartels. They are regular people living their lives, and they are nameless victims of this war that has been going on for the longest time. Because the kingpin strategy, keep in mind, was implemented in 2006 by President Felipe Calderón. And that has been the strategy since. I mean, it's switched up a bit with the abrazos no balazos, hugs not bullets during AMLO. But for the most part, especially when we're talking about United States intervention, which is very prevalent, it's about getting the guy at the top in hopes that the rest of the totem pole crashes down. But what's happening while that totem pole is crashing down is another one that's even bigger, more sturdy, more powerful, is being built right next to it. Now, if we look at the hugs not bullets strategy, because I wanted to get into this a little bit more, especially when we're doing something like this, where 20 bodies in one day are found. You know, when I talk like that, I know I got a comment the other day. Someone's like, Katarina could read a nursery rhyme or a children's book and make it sound scary. If you don't find this absolutely insane, I mean, give your head a shake. We're absolutely desensitized to this level of extreme violence, right? I'm just keeping it real. Let's talk about hugs, not bullets, okay? When you're seeing this high level of violence, typically textbook is to match it with violence because you're not dealing with normal individuals. You're not dealing with folks who have an entrenched sense of compassion, empathy, even humanity, okay? These are people who view their adversary as non-human and have absolutely no value for life. We could get into the morality of this, but it's really deep. And I think that until that there's a certain understanding that, sure, these 20 men who were found dead were likely not perfect victims, they were still victims. I find that with cartel violence, the victims and understanding their deaths, it's very nuanced. Because for a lot of these people, it's like gang violence in the United States. There were very little resources or aspiration to allow these individuals to end up on a better path in life, per se. This was how they were going to meet their end, yes or yes. End of story. And when I'm talking about these topics, there's this, should be this common understanding that there needs to be a level of change in order to ensure that a lot of these people who are going to end up in organized crime have at least the opportunity to not end up there, to not end up with their pants pulled down, their head missing, hanging from a bridge. With a narcomanta that is targeting someone who is not related to these very people, okay? Aside from the emotional aspect, there are geopolitical and U.S. implications, of course, because a 2023 U.S. DOJ indictment outlines that the Chapitos are these leaders of a violent fentanyl and meth empire. They use torture tactics. This indictment outlines how they use animal cruelty as psychological warfare, which is also very common. We've seen the videos of cartels feeding bodies to tigers, even like in recruitment, killing animals in order to dehumanize the person who's training to be in this cartel. Now, what is the U.S. strategy with this, right? Because that's what we're always looking at. And it's to increase pressure on Mexico to clamp down on fentanyl labs. Mexico says they have done this, and I think to an extent, the U.S. has been satisfied with Mexico's attempts to do this, cracking down on the southern border, deploying additional troops, cracking down on the huachicol, the crude oil theft that's going on in Mexico. More troops have been deployed to these areas, and there have been, even in recent weeks, these landmark cases in Mexico with a large amount of arrests of people committing crude oil theft. But what does something like this, in the long run, reveal about the future of cartel warfare? Because we are seeing them become experts in every field of warfare, whether it be psychological, cyber, physical, and propaganda. I love bringing that up. We love us some propaganda over here, right? Chat about that till we die. Now, fragmentation typically equals more violence. And this is what we need to keep in mind. Because you have 20 bodies hanging from, well, I don't think they were all hanging from a bridge, but you have 20 murdered bodies. So everyone in Culiacan wakes up to news that there are 20 dead bodies scattered across their city. When I was reporting in Culiacan, and I covered the murders, the public dead bodies. There were people walking their kids to school at 7 o'clock in the morning, walking right past the dead bodies. This is not only psychological warfare for the very people in charge of combating these criminal organizations, but it's psychological warfare for innocent civilians. Because children walking to school should not be exposed to that. Children generally shouldn't be exposed to that. But this is a vulnerable time, you know? You're a small child, hand in hand with your mom or your father, going to get an education. This sends a very deep-rooted and horrible message. This is another failure of the kingpin strategy. We're seeing this all happen in real time. I've analyzed, even on my Substack, the kingpin strategy. But what's crazy is that we are seeing it happen. And we're seeing the amount of collateral that comes with it. Because when there's less centralized control, there's more conflict. There are groups fighting for that control. And that's why you'll hear this a lot in Mexico. I've been told this a lot when I travel around different regions that are controlled by different cartels, whether they're fragmented or there's a stronghold. But people will typically say that they prefer when there is one head honcho in charge because it results in less violence. It runs more like a stable government in a way. They don't need to fight for territory. They don't need to send these brutal messages. The message is clear. They run the show so everyone can live in peace. And it's almost like this reward system, because if the Mexican government or the US government doesn't intervene and these cartels can maintain a stronghold in whatever region they're operating in, the people of those regions will live in peace. If you are working your ass off, you have a family, and you don't want to see violence, you have to choose the lesser of two evils. And for a lot of those people, the lesser evil is having this centralized control by one cartel. No matter how violent that cartel is, you know that by having them in power, and the powerhouse is not at risk of some adversary coming in and trying to take over, you are going to live in peace. You can walk your children to school without them being exposed to a shot up body on the side of the road or a decapitated head on top of a car. Another issue with this is from the time when the kingpin strategy was implemented in 2006 until now, cartel violence has evolved. Whether that be from the hierarchy of networked franchise-styled violence, or even more symbolic violence, that's media manipulation and local terror tactics, the way these cartels are putting out basically press conference releases on social media, that wasn't happening in 2006. That capacity didn't exist. And so as cartels adapt, it's only fair for government agencies and law enforcement to do the same. But we are not seeing this, because if we were seeing this, 20 dead bodies would not have been found in Culiacan on Monday. And I really feel for the people living there. When I was there in the fall, and the violence had not even come to a head yet, I didn't even expect it to come to this state. It was absolutely devastating to talk to people who just wanted the violence to end. They wanted normal lives. A lot of them saying they wish that neither El Chapo nor El Mayo were ever captured in the first place in order to maintain peace. And that really is devastating. There's a shootout and people are dying and children are ducking under tables. Parents are jumping over their bodies to protect them from stray bullets. People can't even go grocery shopping because, it's shut down by the National Guard because there was some incident. People can't even drive late at night because next thing you know, there's going to be an enfrentamiento and cars are getting shot at and there's provoked crashes. There's no quality of life in this reality that these people are living in. And I do have a lot of compassion for this because it's incredibly unfair. But as we know, nothing in the war on drugs is even fair at all. I have a question. A question from the journalist. Should the U.S. rethink its extradition of El Mayo and its general intelligence practices? Okay, Zambada's alleged kidnapping, and I have to always say alleged, and transfer to the U.S. raises questions of legality and international coordination. We know this because it provokes more retaliatory, I hope, it provokes more retaliation within Mexico. In the U.S., people are safe. Life goes on as normal, but that is not the case in Mexico. And these 20 bodies that were found on Monday shows that no amount of time really ends this retaliation and this infighting. And it takes a long time for a cartel like the Sinaloa cartel, who was once the most powerful in all of Mexico, in all of history, to become completely non-existent, or if not as dangerous as it once was. We're seeing this because this infighting started in September. September, October, November, December, January, February, March, April. We're going on a year, people. Thousands of people have died and are continuing to die. What does the crackdown need to look like, and what do the government responses need to be in order for, at the very least, innocent people who are not a part of this lifestyle, who are not a part of these organizations, can maintain a solid quality of life? I'm a big proponent for people having quality of life because it's necessary for people for survival. Here are some thought-provoking questions that I've had since reading this news. Will the Chapitos faction emerge as dominant or continue to fragment? Here's what I think. I think they will continue to fragment despite them being backed by the CJ&G. I think in this sense, sure, the kingpin strategy works, but I think that CJ&G is going to come out winning. I don't think El Mayo nor El Chapo, neither of their factions, will win. And I think if one of them does become more dominant than the other, we have already seen so much loss that you can't declare this solid winner. It's a nuanced gray area winner, unfortunately. What I am surprised to not see, this was something that I've been thinking about, is the lack of civilian resistance. And I understand why. I understand the extreme fear, and I'm not in any way demoralizing that. What I mean, though, is that this has been going on for almost a year, and I know that frustration is rising, and people are just fed up. And I wouldn't be surprised if at a certain point in time a group does band together and say, screw this, we're going to go take these guys on. We've seen this happen before in Mexico because one thing, and I say this again, Mexican people have been living with this for a long time. This is generational, okay? And there comes a certain point of time when this group of people who are generally very resilient, hardworking, and determined are going to come together and say, if the U.S. isn't helping us, if our own government isn't helping us, and these guys are ruining our livelihoods, let's go. Looking forward, I would love to say that we hope we don't see something like this again. I would really hope that we don't see something like this again, or at least for a while, because I can be hopeful, but I also need to be realistic here. And seeing a case of 20 bodies in one morning is absolute shit. It's tragic. And that should be declared a national tragedy, even if these guys aren't perfect victims, because it's a large loss of life. And I know even some people watching will argue and say, well, it was life that needed to be lost. That's a Band-Aid solution. Here we get to the root of this shit, whether it's the analysis, the context, or when we're trying to kind of discuss a solution. Ideally, this doesn't happen again. But you know where to find me when it does. Thank you guys so much for watching this episode of Borderland Dispatches, an Ironclad original. It's a really heavy topic, and I hate seeing news like this come up. And my heart really does go out for the people in Sinaloa and people facing cartel violence. Stay critical. There's a lot to unpack here, and I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Please be sure to like and subscribe and rate and review this wherever you're listening or watching this. And as always, see you next time.